you're basically telling me you would rather use my money than yours
Yes.
to solve this problem.
Yeah.
That just seems easier for you, doesn't it? No, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julien.
And I'm Kirsten. And today we're talking about how to say no when people ask you for money. It's that one little word that can save almost everybody's budget, but a lot of people don't know how to say it. So we're going to talk about it. Yes, you do. But first, I want to give a shout out to our YouTube fam. A few hundred of you have subbed in the last couple of weeks. And I just wanted to say hi. Like, what up? I see you in the comments. We are so glad you're here and can't wait to get to know y'all.
Yes. I want to jump right in.
No.
I do. Good job. No, I do want to jump right in. This is something that I think is really sensitive, and it scratches the surface of so many of these larger issues around just who we believe we are as people and how important our relationships are. And it's one of those things that is such a, what you call it, like a blind spot in people's budgets. And it is also a bit of a continuation of the last conversation we had, which was pretty popular around emergency planning. Mm-hmm. Because when we think about emergencies, more often than not, we're thinking about ourselves. But the reality is sometimes emergencies in other people's lives also impact our money. That's our household, our income. And this is something that I am personally experiencing. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but it's the season for giving. And so there's also that subtle societal, cultural pressure to give. The good news is this was a record breaking. I know we shouted out kind of sarcastically that this was a record breaking Black Friday, which every year, the last couple of years has been a record breaking. Shout out to e-commerce and their effectiveness and drawing more and more people to spend more money. But we're also giving a little bit more too, right? And so that's a good thing, a bright side. It's pales in comparison, obviously, to the amount that we spend, just being realistic, but there's a pressure there. And I think even if we're not talking about giving our money, especially for a lot of people, I know when I was working in corporate, there was always that end of the year team building. Let's go do something good for the community as a team. And so there's always that pressure to like give your time, to give more of your money. And if you don't, you're kind of viewed or start to feel like, man, maybe I'm not a good person,
Yeah.
And maybe you don't go to that extent, but like you certainly feel it,
Yeah,
like
you do.
It's an awkward feeling for sure.
Anytime you're dealing with a request for money, whether it's through charity, like you just talked about, or it's a loan or a favor, it can trigger all kind of feelings of guilt or discomfort. It can just make you feel uncomfortable. Yeah. It can make you feel stressed. And I think it's just one of those things that regardless of how good your budget is, you can't budget for it because you can't necessarily predict when it's going to hit.
Yeah.
And I think the truth is it drains people's budgets way more than just on the financial side. First of all, they're underestimating the financial side, like the drain on all of these little requests throughout the year, whether it's $10 to someone on the soccer team or $4 to contribute to the boss's gift or whatever it is, the lotto, whatever it is, there's a bunch of drains on the budget. And I think the goal for this episode is to show how we can better handle saying no across all of these different situations without damaging your relationship or just completely eroding your financial goals.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I want to jump right into this situation. And again, this is personal, and I'm going to try my best to block out any of the details that might, lead someone to identify who I'm talking about. I doubt anybody is. It's not that serious. But a couple of months ago, I remember telling you about this. I was contacted by a friend of mine. And even like right at the start, I'm saying friend, and I'm like,
somebody I know.
Like we went to college together, and
used to be friends.
Yeah, we were friends 20 years ago. You know what I mean? And, he reached out and he said that, hey man, he's down bad and he really, really needed some help. And I'm at a point now where I don't really get a lot of requests for money or even just ask for like support, like I'm down bad. Like I don't really get that often. But this one kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I'm going to try to be brief. He said he needed help, said he was in the hospital, like things were not looking good. I think it was like diabetes and or like kidney disease or something like that. And it just felt horrible because I'm like, man, this is like on top of like other friends that I know that were in college that I know had passed. And so I'm like particularly sensitive to it. And I'm also particularly sensitive to it with men because like that's where I'm seeing a lot of these kinds of issues, which is another side story altogether. And I said, well, look, I immediately just, roll out the playbook. I was like, look, I can't help you with money, but what I can do is I can help get you some food. And the reason why I did that, there were a couple of reasons why. One, I had to go back into my memory and think about who this person is and some of my early memories of him. And I could not help but to cycle through an issue, an altercation that he had with someone that I really care about. It was a girl, and she feels or felt, and I would argue probably still feels like very unsafe. And it was a triggering moment for me because I was like, that was like one of the early times in young adulthood where I was dealing with someone who felt like, yo, this person went from being a really, really nice person to, I think he tried me, did not like my response, and then all of a sudden, like showed a very dark, angry side for them. So fast forward, 15, maybe 20 years, probably closer to 15. And I'm actually seeing positive things from this person on Facebook. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, this is good. Cause like, I know he was struggling. He was a little lonely for a while. And I was like really happy, like to see that he had settled. I think he had found a partner and they were like doing really, really great together. And then shortly after that, that turned to shit. And he all of a sudden became one of those people who start publicizing like really, really intimate, like personal details about the breakup. And I could not understand. I was like, oh my gosh, that is the same switch that flipped when this person was having these issues, 15 years prior. And so I could not help but to cycle through these two instances and then start thinking about my own family and my own reputation and my own safety, if you will. I was like, do I really want to be like even engaged or in contact with somebody like this? But I still said, you know what, goodness of my heart, I said, let me see what I can do. And I was like, look, if you send me your address, I can get you, we can put some food in the fridge, man.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? And I remembered going through that process. You sent me the address. I think I scheduled like a Instacart or something like that. And it was a combination of things. Like I went deep. I was like, you know what? I want to throw like some must-have things based on what he specifically told me. Like you're having these kinds of issues. These are foods that are designed to help with these kinds of issues. Like I really like made it personal. I literally went through and found out like what some of his favorite foods were and ensured that that was in the delivery. I had some prepared foods because I was like, you know what? But I asked this dude to cook. Shout out to like a episode that we just recorded. It was like, I'm not about to ask you to cook. A combination of things like food that you can heat up and eat immediately, healthy foods, like specifically designed for the issue that you are dealing with, like all this kinds of stuff. And I remember monitoring like the delivery and, I'm not gonna lie, like I felt pretty good about myself. I was like, all right, like I'm glad, like there's somebody in his life who can do this. I'm that person. And a couple of things like threw me off. One, it took him a minute to get back to me. Like I knew when it was delivered. It took him a minute to get back to me. And I was like, all right, everybody's not as like on it like I am. I get it. He's also sick. Like, might be sleeping or whatever. But then when he did get back to me, it was more like, yo, thanks, man. Like really like this is something that we do on a regular basis. Like you already know. And I was like, no, I literally haven't even seen you.
That dog.
You know what I mean? And so
At least it wasn't like a request. Like, dang, you get no barbecue sauce?
I thought, I'm not going to lie. Like these are the kinds of thoughts that kind of went through my head as I'm like not hearing from him. And I was like, I was like, oh, so he did scam you, but you know what? I'm out of or whatever. And it's not, not a major deal. And if anything, like this would be a topic of conversation. So that happens. Then a couple weeks after that, he reaches out again and he's asking for more help. Now, I suspected that this was going to be an issue. So even after I had the food and the groceries sent to him, I also followed up and I was like, look, you may not have the resources, but based on where you said you are, I asked my network. I was like, these are some people and some organizations that you need to be reaching out to. Cause like, this sounds like it's going to be an ongoing issue. Like, you need support. Like, you need a foundation. You need a program. Like, you need like long-term care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And he didn't even respond to that. Right. It was almost like, I don't know. And so then he reached out again, and I was like, like, okay, did you do any of the things? Did you reach out to any of the programs? Did you do any of the things that I did a lot of research. I reached out to my people who live in your area. Like, these are qualified leads of people that they know, boots on the ground, that are doing the work, and like, no response.
Mm.
And then I was like, all right, I get it. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm still being like empathetic. I'm like, I get it. No response. He's like down bad. Like, I ain't got time to be like doing homework right now. Like, I gotta eat. I gotta take care of myself. And a couple weeks went by, and then he reached out again. And then I started to realize, I was like, I don't even, like, these don't even feel personal anymore. Like,
Right.
these feel like
Group text,
like a copy text job where he threw it in there and then like inserted my name at the front part, and he's like just sending it out to everybody. And then I'm like, how is somebody that is so bad? Like, that at this point, I'm like connecting all the dots. So long story short, like, there was that situation. And then there was another situation, and I'll be brief.
Lord.
This is with a friend. I reached out to another college friend that I hadn't seen. I hadn't seen her in a long time. And so we're just going through like the mental Rolodex, like, whatever happened to this person, that person. And then she goes through a situation where she was taken advantage of by somebody that we know. Like, at least, I'm not going to say I was taken advantage of, but like, the person that reached out to me is someone that I have a casual collegiate relationship with. Like, you know what I mean? You're not like a brother, like that close or whatever. And it just made me feel like, damn, like, you just, maybe you peep game, like, see what I'm doing online or whatever, and then think that you can just casually reach out and that I'm not going to feel it, or that it just doesn't really matter. And in this case, it was like, nah, like, they were like close, like super close. You could not see one without seeing the other. And to know that that person literally in her situation had basically moved into one of her properties, left it trashed, took her furniture, like ruined her credit, like did all kinds of stuff, and then ghosted. Like, it was just bad.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about it, we both went back and was like, yeah, but at the end of the day, I always knew she kind of had issues. You know what I'm saying? Like, she grew up like this, she dealt with these kinds of issues. And so I'm sharing those situations because, one, like, it's just on my heart heavy. Like, this is the season. Two, there's just a lot of this stuff going on.
There is.
I know it's not just me.
No.
And I know that there are people who feel bad for even feeling frustrated about it because they're so blessed and they're so fortunate. And I'm just like, I'm hoping I'm like skipping ahead to like the real takeaway here, or at least one of them, is that you are entitled to be frustrated. Just as you are empathetic, just as you are entitled and know to automatically just, be appreciative of everything that you have, you're allowed to be frustrated if somebody is taking advantage of you, or if somebody is not showing what you feel like is a baseline level of appreciation for you going above and beyond for them, or even just like doing the basics of what you think people should do when they are reaching out to you and asking you to give, donate, whether it's your time, money, or both.
And you honestly need to feel a little frustrated sometimes, not all the time, but that's the only way that your brain gets a well-rounded view of what's happening.
Correct.
And that's the only way that you develop discernment, the ability to say no because no makes sense.
Correct.
Not just because you ain't got it, not just because, this person asked you nicely or they're in a certain situation. It's just because it don't make sense to say yes. And so that's kind of what we want to get into today. We want to talk about 3 different situations where someone might ask for money. You kind of touched on the first one, which is saying no to people who you don't really know like that. They're not a complete stranger. You may work with them. You may live in the same neighborhood with them. You may know them through a friend of a friend, but they reach out, they ask for a charitable donation, drop a GoFundMe link in their Instagram stories, and you have to say no.
Yeah.
The second situation is with people you do know. And this is where it gets real sticky. You're talking about family members, cousins, close friends, just like what your friend went through, like people that you know and in some cases really love. And then the third case is when you've set a precedent for saying yes. You've said yes in the past, and now you need to say no. How do you do that? I want to start with saying no to people you don't really know like that. We call them weak social ties. And I think it's tough for a couple of reasons. The first is just social norms and politeness, especially if you're a woman, like you're taught that you should say yes as much as possible. And particularly if you think there's some sort of status to be gained from it.
Yep.
A lot of people just want to avoid the awkwardness, right? Like your coworker comes around and they ask for Girl Scout cookies or popcorn or whatever. You don't want to say no because it seems like a little bit of money that's going to help their child or, whatever they're raising money for. And then the other reason is just like you said, survivor's guilt. You feel like you have so much, you've been blessed with so much. You feel bad not saying yes. Or there's like an identity thing where you're trying to maintain appearances and not seem cheap.
Yep.
Those two things are like neck and neck for a lot of people's reasons for being unwilling or unable or just apprehensive about saying no to people they don't really know like that.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. You might assume that it's easier to say no to people that you don't know like that. I don't think it is.
Right. It's easier to say no with high dollar amounts. I think it's actually harder when the ask is little.
I think
for people you don't know.
I think it just all depends. To your point, if it's just $5, like it's not a big deal. But nobody knows if that just $5. Like, hey, certain times of the year or the month, like that just $5, like really, really matters.
And it's mad just $5 is
exactly.
And it's all the roundups at the
exactly
at the register. It's the tips. It's everything.
Yeah, it's inflation. It's all the little things. So yeah, I don't know that it's any easier. And I'm saying that, and I'm glad we went there because I think that is a part of this learning experience, is not jumping to those kinds of conclusions or beliefs or expectations that it is just somehow magically easier because you just met this person and you don't know them. It's sometimes I can think of plenty of people that I know and have known for years that I'm actually closer to, that if they ask me for money, I already got my lines. There's absolutely no way I would give you any money. You want to know why? Because I remember, and I can just go down a laundry list. I'm not pocket watching, but I'm letting you know that I don't think it's my responsibility to take on the cost of these things when you have other ways that you can do it. And you're basically telling me you would rather use my money than yours to solve this problem.
Yeah.
That just seems easier for you, doesn't it? No, thank you. Yeah. I don't want to do that.
I like that line. So you would rather use my money than yours.
That's what it sounds like.
That's a good way to get yourself in the right frame of mind.
Correct.
To say no.
And that's exactly what it is.
Especially when you see people spend it.
I think to those lines, and I'm again trying to protect the identities of some people, because there's always the question of whether or not you should ask, well, what do you need it for? Or, there's a line of people who believe that based on the relationship, you don't ask any questions. I've heard that one, and that has led to all kinds of arguments. But I think anytime you're going to part ways with your money, or especially if someone is trying to, whether it's forcefully or subtly coerce you to do it, you have a responsibility to ask questions. And if they tell you that you don't deserve that responsibility, then you find some way to remove yourself from the situation. So let's talk about just some tactics on how to say no, because there's a variety of ways that you can do this. I am not particularly good at like deflecting with kindness, but I think that's one of, like, obviously if we're talking about being at checkout and, do you feel like rounding up today for, insert national nonprofit organization? That's a quick no. This sounds terrible, but tactically, that's a lot easier for you to say no to. There's very little social pressure. It gets a little harder, and I know a lot of people are kind of triggered by, the swirling of the iPad or something like that. If someone's asking for gratuity, or, the other day I was walking with a friend and, you see it coming. It was like, oh, here it is. And this wasn't like someone who was in need. It was a local organization that was prepared with their spiel, and it's the season for it, right? Mm-hmm. And you just have a decision to make, and it's like, thanks, but no thanks. There's that. And so if you don't know someone, like, it works, right? Like, get into that rhythm. I think most people can find ways to do that. But like, I'm genuinely surprised sometimes by the amount of people who just cannot. They just cannot. They feel like, oh my gosh, I did not know that was a thing. That sounds horrible. Yes, here's $20. I hope this helps us solve the problem. Another option is just like silence. like just basically like just ignoring the person or the prompt or whatever it is. That seems like, if it works for you, great. I've done that. I'm not going to lie. Like, I want this conversation to be real and somewhat vulnerable. I've done that.
I
Like, I
absolutely
think
do it. Walking
anyone,
into TJ Maxx, if you yell at me to come over to your kiosk, I'm going to act like I didn't hear you.
yeah,
Like, give yourself permission to say, I didn't invite that conversation. And so I don't have to respond.
yeah.
Yes, they'll keep going. Yes, they might think that you're rude. But
And
at the
some people are
same
very
time,
good at it too,
you
at
did not
luring you
ask
back in.
them. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't ask for this interaction. In other contexts, that's considered an assault. Like, you cannot just expect everybody that you talk to talk back when there's no relationship there. Now, obviously, guys, use your nuance brains. If we're talking about at a church or in a community where there is some familiarity, silence may not work. But in a world where you're just being asked because you walked by on the street, you don't have to. You absolutely can deflect with kindness, as you said. Say, man, that looks cool. I appreciate that y'all are working on that. Good luck. I don't have it today.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to pass on that, but
yeah,
best of luck to you. And
best
I
of
really
luck.
hope you guys hit your goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think we have to learn the difference between reactive generosity and intentional generosity. And this is something I struggled with because part of my identity is not a matter of not wanting to seem cheap, but it is very much wanting to be generous. I want that to be my legacy, that I was generous with all things, information, love, attention, money, all the things. But reactive generosity is when we're caught off guard and someone asks you something and you feel compelled to say yes just because they asked, not because it aligns with some bigger goal or some interest. It's just because they asked. And it leaves you feeling resentful, and it chips away at any ability to give a really meaningful yes in the future, because you're just allowing people to just erode and ask you things.
Yeah.
Now, intentional generosity is pre-planned, it's proactive, it's aligned with your values, it leaves you feeling confident in your decisions. And so those are the tactics that have helped me the most with saying no to people I don't really know like that. Is one, a dedicated monthly budget for giving. And ours is it's loose. It's more like an annual budget that we will flex based on time of year. But it allows me to say, like, look, we already planned our giving, our budget is set. And so I just don't have it to give to you. Like, I ain't got it.
Yeah.
We already spent it.
Yeah.
And automating helps with that. So if you have not listened to the automating episode, go back and listen to that. The other thing that we've thought about is giving our giving a really philanthropic angle and theme. And so for us, we decided that $1,000 problems are the ones that we're most comfortable solving.
Correct.
Right? We're best suited solving.
It's more of a matter of impact.
Yes.
Right? So I know that me giving $1,000 or $100, whatever it is, to this particular issue makes that issue go away versus, a much larger issue,
Correct.
a legacy issue, for lack of a better descriptor, that my $1,000 or $100 is not really, I don't really feel like it's going to have that much of an impact. And I understand that there are tons of people who will say, hey man, that's not necessarily true. That's a flawed approach. I'm just saying, if you're looking for a way to say no, another filter that might be of value to you, that's another one. It could also be, and I think maybe you were going here, where there are things that you're passionate about, and then being clear on the issues that you aren't, because the fact of the matter is your budget cannot accommodate every single social ill.
And it's not supposed to.
No, it's not.
That accountability belongs to our government and the institutions that receive our tax dollars and our funding to do those things, right? So the concept of $1,000 problems is not like there's a max on the problems that I can help with, and that's $1,000. It's more about scope. It's about looking at things that are undercounted or go under the radar with big institutions, things like food insecurity, where
Correct.
it's undercounted. People have normalized it so much, they don't even know that it's an issue. Sending $1,000 to community fridges does more in my local neighborhood than trying to resolve housing inequity in the city of Atlanta, right? I can pay somebody's rent for the month and that only gets them 30 days. I can give $1,000 to a community fridge and that feeds 100 people, right? So like the difference is around where we're comfortable and where we think our money has the most impact.
Yeah. So finding that theme, tying that theme to what you hope or desire your long-term legacy to be, I think is something that is really helpful. And, you know, the last thing I'll say on it is you have to think about yourself almost like a corporation in that sense. This is kind of what corporations do. And that's really kind of where we got it from, where it's like, you know, for Rich and Regular LLC, there are certain things, there are certain lanes that we play in. We love being at that intersection of food. And so it just kind of made sense that this is something that not only that I do professionally for a number of years, but it seems widely overlooked and it's interesting and it's something that we want people to do more of cooking at home. And then when we think about the general availability, it just felt really weird for us where it's like, wow, it seems to me as if the broader conversations about money and wealth are so much more focused on finding other ways to make more money, but not more creative ways or fulfilling ways to give it away, to be philanthropic, to solve problems in your local community or school or, you know, things of that nature. And so, yeah, I think that to me is probably one of the biggest ways. And I think that's helpful for whether or not you're talking about or talking to someone that you've just met or someone that you have known for a really, really long time.
Yes,
Like
let's
either
go
way,
there.
it prepares you and equips you with some language around your decision and adds a little bit more context to you saying no as opposed to you just saying no. And, you know, whether or not somebody believes that there's another reason for it or not, you know, it's up to them. But
Yeah.
I think when you add that additional language, it helps.
Yeah, it's proactive. It's no different than you saying like, I don't eat pork.
Correct.
I ain't got it.
Correct.
Like I've already decided what I'm spending my money on and you're not it.
Yeah.
So I want to pivot though and talk about saying no to people you do know. Because I think this is the one that really gets people caught up. It's hard because the emotional stakes are so high. You're so afraid of disappointing a friend or a family member because you didn't acknowledge their feelings or you didn't prioritize their needs. And it's just, it's so hard for a lot of people.
It is. It is. You know, I've got several personal stories and situations where I've had to say no, or in some cases even walk away from an old yes that I've said, you know, where I said, man, nah, listen, when such and such happens, I got you.
Right.
And then you get there and it's like, ooh, actually,
I didn't know it was going to be like this. I thought I was going to put the team on my back, but
yeah,
them taxes.
not going to be able to do it. Or yeah, no. And I struggled for a long, long time with survivor's guilt and feeling like I was one of a few that made it, and then buying into the narrative that it's your responsibility to lift as you climb. And, you know, my feedback on that for anyone that still buys into that, but maybe is admitting that it's hard to do, is that there are tons of ways to get people to the top of the mountain. And what's I've found is most useful is that instead of strapping a bunch of people to a rope and convincing yourself that you have superhuman strength and endurance to last a lifetime, that you could also argue that if you were to lighten your load, you can get to the top of the mountain or to the next safest landing and buy a rope.
Amen.
And then send it down, or figure out how to send resources down to then guide people to a shorter path to getting to where you are. But there are so many other ways to help lift. Lifting does not always require you putting people on your back or tying them to your physical body or your paycheck and then dragging yourself with all of these other people with you. And I think that is one of the things that so many people get wrong. And I was one of those people. I have to give a shout out to Cassandra. Shout out to Cassandra Descent. I remember having a very deep and intimate conversation with her about that. And that was one of the things that contributed to why we decided to liquidate our real estate portfolio. Because like the reality is we also became one of the primary reasons why I decided to get into real estate is because I was thinking about my mom. And I was thinking worst case scenario, I have a place where I can put her. And I was like, yeah, but that's the terrible reason. You have to look at this objectively, right? You have to take your own advice. You have to be able to strip away the emotions, look at the numbers of that particular property, look at the prospects for that particular market, and then look at the alternative to what you could be doing with that capital. And then use that to supplement that decision. And I was really glad that she confronted me or asked me to look at it from that lens. And so I'm passing that wisdom on and encouraging more and more people to just think about lifting as you climb differently. And maybe it's a matter of like lift after you've climbed.
Oof.
And then you are in a much better position to sacrifice yourself and then maybe even climb even higher than where you've already been.
Yeah, you can bend your knees.
You can bend your knees. You can use so
Both
many other
hands.
tactics. But
yeah, you're not holding on to the rope with one hand and holding on to the person with another hand. You preaching today. You're preaching. Do you think it gets easier the older you get? Because you're saying that at 45, 44.
44.
44 and a half. And you're also saying like climbed in the past tense. Like it takes time to climb. And that doesn't stop people's problems from happening on your way up. And I think there is something to looking at it objectively, but you have to remember that you're not looking at the relationship objectively. There's still room for there to be emotion and guilt and sadness for that person's situation.
Yeah.
There's room for that in your heart. There may not be room for that in your budget. You can't always just budget for guilt and sadness and emotion for other people. You really have to look at the problem objectively and say, am I the best person to solve this thing for the long term, like sustainably?
Yeah.
Otherwise, all you're doing is buying yourself 30 days at a time. And that can get really, really exhausting. And it's unsustainable. Our salaries, our income, the whole setup around jobs and tax law is not meant for you to carry multiple households under one umbrella.
Most people can't handle their own emergencies.
That's it.
Like we can't simultaneously accept the fact that most people can't handle their own emergencies, yet hold ourselves to a higher standard for handling other people's emergencies.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what happens. To answer your question, I don't think it gets easier as you get older. It doesn't. And I'm saying that from a position of being older and having additional resources. And even in moments where I was a little older and didn't quite have it all. And I was like, you know what? It's still hard. Like you will always find a emotional heartstring to pull. So, having the money does not make it get any easier, in my opinion. So no. Don't convince yourself that it'll get easier. And I think, if you don't believe me, you can ask anyone who was quite generous to a fault and then got to a point like in their 40s and 50s, mid-career, experienced some type of issue with their career earning potential, and now wishes that they had a stronger foundation or safety net to fall back on, but just convincing themselves that, you know what, at least I'm not as far back as I was. Like, yeah, you can do that to make yourself feel a little bit more comfortable, but you wish that you were better off.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just have to look at it objectively.
Yes, I agree. I don't think getting older makes it easier in general. I will say I turned 40 this year. I turned 40 this year, and it brought a heightened sense of time and awareness. Like I really understood, like statistically speaking, this is halftime. Like I'm midlife. Like I'm at halftime. I'm in the locker room trying to decide, like, are we going to do the second half like we did the first half? And what it brought was a better understanding that every yes is a trade-off. If you say yes to one thing, then I'm saying no to something else. But it doesn't erode the habit of constantly saying no to the things that I think are important to me.
Yeah.
That still requires work. Like I can now clearly see it, but I doesn't mean I always act on it. So a couple of tactics here that we found, or at least that I found work really well for me, is to offer alternatives. To say exactly what you told your friend, like, I can't give you money, but I can connect you to someone or help in a non-financial way. I can give my time. I'm happy to, pick you up or take you here or save you this or whatever. Like, whatever you can offer.
Yep.
You can also say something like, I don't really lend money to friends or family, but here's what I can do. And that's another way of saying, like, I can send you groceries or, whatever feels comfortable. And I'm going to say an unpopular opinion, because if you are a tither, meaning you belong to a church family and you've been giving 10% or more or less for a number of years, your church counts as a resource. Do not be afraid to send people who ask you for money directly to the team at church that is meant to serve the community or does outreach or can connect them to another resource. You are a part of that community, and you have to ask yourself, do you want to be the person that's always just making deposits, or do you want to have places where you can make withdrawals as well? You don't want to just be the person that everybody comes to. I know people take a lot of pride in that, but going back to your point, go back to people who have been overtly generous, the family, the one that made it. And I'm saying it as one of the people in my family that has made it. It's not sustainable. And you absolutely do develop this sense or this burden of like, why is it always me? Who gonna take care of me?
For sure. For sure. Hey, I remember it started with me. I got a lot of family in New York, and for me, it started early because I left New York, came down to Atlanta, and it was like, when you gonna come back? When you gonna visit? When you gonna think? You know what? Y'all act like flights only leave New York.
Don't get me started on travel.
You know what I'm saying?
I gotta go. Everybody, go see everybody.
Or it would be, oh, you're going to such and such. Make sure you go see this person and that person, and make sure you bring this to that person. Which is a very Caribbean, Jamaican thing. It's like if you go to Jamaica, you got to bring 2 suitcases. One with your stuff, and the other one was all stuff to be distributed out to all of the family, folks who don't have. And I get it, but it does become a burden after a while. And, on behalf of the people who are the person or the people who are cutting that check and making the concession and always expected to carry more because, but such and such ain't got it. You owe it to yourself to say, you know what, this is where I draw the line.
And you know what? It's not a burden because you're less successful, which is the craziest part, because it feels like I'm not doing enough if it starts to feel like a burden. It feels like I should have more. I should have more than enough to be able to take care of all these people. But what you're underestimating is that it's not just your costs that are increasing. Their expenses increase too. The size of their needs grows just as much as yours do. It may start out as just, I need, to cover this month's rent. But it might end up like, now I need a down payment and a deposit, and I got to move out by Thursday, and they found mold. And it's these are all normal needs. But once you develop that pipeline that they can depend on you for needs, those needs just continue to expand to the degree that you say yes all the time.
Yes. So let's take that as a bit of a transition. This is like the last kind of category, which is how to say no when you've already set the precedent of yes. You said yes, 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 yes. How do you pull out that draw 4 no card that they did not know you had, that reverse, flip it back and put it in, no, skip me, go to somebody else. It's hard. That one is really, really hard because it also, I think, stirs the pot on the potential for resentment because, you may have gone from being able to gladly do it. And I've been there to great pride in the ability to say yes over and over or without really feeling any type of, loss or even sacrifice on our side until things get a little tight. And then you start to realize, and people say like, oh, people switch up. They absolutely do.
They do.
They absolutely do. Like that part, I will say, is not an exaggeration. I know people, start talking about this is why you should never talk about money and never talk about how much money you have. And that is part of the reason why we don't. But that part is absolutely true. Like when you take something away, no different than you do with a dog. And say, I'm used to coming here at 2:00 and seeing a bowl full of kibble. And I'm here at 2:00. I'm looking around, there's nothing here. And now the way that I'm looking at you is a little different because I used to look at you with gratitude and appreciation. And now I'm looking at you like, what's going on? Like, why you ain't do the thing that you've been doing? You have to do it. You have to say no. And I'll go back to what you said before. If for no other reason is because you need the reps. You owe it to yourself. You need the reps. And that was part of what I experienced most recently. And part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation is because I realized that I gotten a little rusty. I was like,
I got a little soft in your
I got a little soft. And I needed to reclaim my no and get more reps under the belt and start realizing like, oh, because sometimes you realize, and this has been my case recently, where you say no to someone and then you can guide them to a solution that they probably had not even thought about.
Right.
Like that happens too. It's not always you say no to someone that you said yes before. It's like, no, you can say no to someone and then say, well, there's a program for that now. So we don't even have to do this anymore. But people become so accustomed to coming to you. You are the plug. You are the source. You are the person. You are the problem solver. And now you can say, you know what? Actually, there's a new thing that alleviates the problem altogether. You should check that out. And you put it back on that person's plate. That is support.
Yes.
That is support as well. It's not always shielding someone from a problem. It's helping them solve those problems on their own.
Correct.
Or helping them identify a wider set of solutions that they can employ so that they have more control over their lives as opposed to you carrying that burden for them in addition to cutting a check and or spending time.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's you putting unnecessary pressure on yourself, meaning you did something a long time ago and now you feel like all of your yeses has led to this lifetime subscription where it's like, well, I've always paid for her nails, so I'm not going to stop now. And it's like, no, you can. You can absolutely change your mind. And this is specific to like family relations. If you have covered someone's tuition for the last 8 years and you've decided like not in the budget this year, you can absolutely change your mind. Give them the courtesy heads up, like, you know, do what you need to do to be polite about it. But like, it is what it is.
Yep.
And I think the other thing that has really helped me with this is that you have to be able to affirm that they will find another way.
Yes.
And this is really where the work is. And then, you know, my affirmation girlies, it's not just for you. Like, you have to affirm that they will find another way. You got to say like, look, I can't make it happen this year, but I am so sure that you are going to have no problem getting what you need. Good luck. Like, seriously, good luck. If I can help in another way, let me know. But you had to believe that. Like, the reason a lot of people don't do that is because they don't actually believe it. They've given themselves a God complex where I'm the only one that can help this person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the only one that they have. I'm the only person they have. And I promise you,
my brother ain't going to do it because he ain't shit. My sister ain't going to do it because they ain't shit.
Try it.
Well, give them a chance.
Try it. Every single time. It don't matter if everybody's talking about they ain't shit brother or that long lost relative. They do find another way.
They sure will.
They absolutely do. It may not be a way that you would have picked. It might not have been the way that you would have done it, but they find a way.
Yeah.
I
think you're right. And I think that's actually one of the best tips that I can offer is to, again, treat yourself like a corporation. Most corporations that are worth a damn, especially those that give regular contributions to nonprofit organizations, they don't just cut it like cold turkey. Like, they're not that cold-blooded. In most cases, they have, let's say, like biannual meetings. They let people know that, hey, things are shifting a little bit so that the nonprofit or the fundraising head has some kind of heads up. It's not like, hey, you go from being my lifeline at 11:59 and then when the clock strikes 12, all of a sudden you ghosted me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think that's how people think about it. And I think if you give people a heads up and say, hey, just so you know, there's been some rumbles at work and I'm not really sure how things are going to shape out. I need you to start doing some research on what you may need to do to make up for the gap that I'm providing you. It could be programs. It could be part-time job. It could be, you know, whatever it is. Like, is there a roommate situation, whatever that thing is, but I need you to take lead on that while I'm out here doing my part. Hopefully we don't have to go down this road, but I need you to start doing your part to help thinking about what an alternative would look like. I got you up until whatever, but after that, I really don't know.
Yeah.
And from there, you can gauge how well they solve problems on their own. Now, obviously, if they haven't had to do much on their own, they're going to struggle. But you've given them enough of a head start. Maybe it's 3 months or 6 months. And then you can see, and then both of you can start to prepare and realize that, hey, man, we had this conversation a while ago. Neither of us are surprised. And you've at least given yourself a bit of a runway as opposed to a hard chop, cold turkey, I don't support you anymore. And I think that we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to the other people to do that. And I would say if you're the person that is being supported, that's something that you should be doing anyway.
Yeah.
You know, you should be grateful for what other people are doing for you, but you do owe it to yourselves to find a more sustainable solution for yourself that does not involve somebody else parting ways with their time and their money. Like, this is part of the agreement. It's part of the American experiment here. Like, we are, you know, kind of on our own here, and it's not fair to other people to be carrying more than they really, really should. And that's a big conversation, but
it is.
I think planting
and I think
that
the audience is nuanced enough to understand that we're not against collective support, obviously, but we are for everyone doing their part.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, when it comes to supporting friends and family, you don't have to cut them all cold turkey. We're not saying that.
No.
You know, if they upset you or disrespect you or whatever it is, then sure, everybody has that spade in there, and, you know, sitting on a big joker,
deuce,
sitting on a deuce of diamonds. And I was bet you know I had it. Bow.
I want to do an episode on estrangement. I feel like white people been on that shit for like 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's a big issue.
It is.
Yeah, sounds like a great solo episode. I can't wait to hear it.
All right, I want to end with one last thing, which is what has helped you say no the most? Has there been one thing or evolution in your life that has helped you get more comfortable with the idea?
That's a great question. So one, I think the obvious answer is being a parent and having a child that has their own wants and their needs. It's expensive to raise a kid, certainly at a high level. And so having a kid, I think most people can kind of use that as an excuse. And I'm using that word on purpose because I really want people to graduate from the idea of using excuses, right? Because I've certainly used my son as an excuse. I've used you as an excuse, like, look, man, player.
You sure have. Some of my wife said
I would love to, man. But man, you don't even want to know what would happen if I did. My wife crazy, bro. Like, I couldn't do that, man. I'm sorry. But good luck. And most people sort of fade to black if you pull that card. Those are excuses. To answer your question, I think doing the work on legacy and thinking about who you want to be and realizing that regardless of how long when you do that work and you are living a value focused life, it leads you in all kinds of ways and it shows up in all kinds of ways. And you start to kind of tear down things that used to be walls, like, whether it's racial identity or, sexual orientation or gender or all those things. And you start to gravitate towards people who simply have shared values and you start to reject things that are against those values. And so that's been the biggest thing for me, having the time and the capacity to live a value focused, what some people call purpose driven life. Most people don't have that privilege because they're so busy and focused on work. And that's been the biggest thing for me. And so whether we're talking about saying no or, simply removing certain things, like you said, from your diet, or just ending certain habits and picking up other habits because it supports where you are and where you believe you're going in your life. I think doing more of that kind of work naturally leads you there.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it's been bigger goals. Bigger goals has helped me say no more because bigger goals change my relationship with sacrifice. They are a clearer filter on my decision making because you start to see those everyday no's really add up to something bigger. Like, it feels bad when you say it, but then at the end of the month, when you collect them all, you're like, $72 worth of no's.
Yeah.
It's $150 worth of no's. And I think that, along with age gives me the confidence to prioritize myself, but the goals give me the clarity to know what's worth prioritizing. So I think those two things together have really just helped me. It's not easier. It's, I guess, be more comfortable with it.
I think, yeah.
It's like handling spice levels.
Exactly.
Where it's like the first time you have some spice, you're like, whoo, I'm not going to make it. And then the second time you're like, all right, I just need to sip some water in between. And the third time you're like, I kind of like it. I kind of like what my tongue's doing right now.
Yeah, it's certainly it's certainly a cleaner way of living. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me. And it sounds like for you as well, like just living a certain lifestyle where pretending is not a daily requirement, which is what a lot of people do, right? Like, we pretend that our values are important and we try to enforce them every now and then. But I think when you live the kind of life that we live, you don't have nearly as many detractors or distractions, and it forces you to really exist within a certain space, which forces the issue. And so it's not until somebody from outside this new center or this new place comes in from the past and has an expectation that you do something and you be like, oh man, I'm not that person anymore.
Yeah.
But I really, really hope that you find your place and, Godspeed. But yeah.
Godspeed, but yeah.
I've never said Godspeed before. That was the first time I'm ever saying this. I'm not really sure how to use it. I don't understand what Godspeed means.
I think it's like,
with the speed of miracles?
Godspeed.
Like superhuman speed?
I don't know, child.
What does Godspeed mean?
We're going to have to look that up when we're done.
That sounds like a great question for AI. What does it mean?
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. We've been talking about saying no, but I'm going to need you to say yes to leaving a 5-star rating and review or a comment below to keep the conversation going. Have a wonderful holiday season. We will see y'all next week.
Peace.
If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.